Hello, my name is Jasmine Stewart, and I will be doing the second portion of my musculoskeletal project. Just to recap some information about the client, which is myself, I overall have no day-to-day pain from any of the injuries I'm about to list. So left ankle pop, right ankle sprain, shin splints, calf tightness, pain in both ankles, and back pain in that order. Also, as a reminder for working out or any type of training, I've done no weight training. I have decreased my overall movement, and I'm sitting more and laying in bed more since the pandemic started March 12th until now. Also, since April to August, I was walking 2 miles through heels about 3 times a week. However, since August till now, I have not continued this practice. So some relevant details of my training. So I train 3 times a week. These are not consecutive days. I just had to get 3 workouts in for that week. Each exercise was 3 sets of 10 reps. And for single leg exercises, this meant 10 reps per limb. So for phase one, which was 2 weeks, it was hip bridges, kneeling glute hold, plowing the field, dead bug, intrinsic foot training, and sitting toe cars. And for phase two, which was also 2 weeks, it was standing hip rotations, bulldog circuit, push-up shoulder touch, intrinsic foot training, and standing toe cars. Now for changes to the FMS based on training. So unfortunately, I did not change my FMS scores that much. However, there were some differences in movement patterns and pain that did come from my training. So the first one I want to go over is the deep squat. So again, my score was still a 1. It was a 1 before, and it's a 1 in the post. However, one small detail that I noticed So as you can see here, as I get into the deep squat, in my earlier FMS, I noticed that in my thoracic spine, I was hyperextending my arms back so that the dowel would be behind my heels in the test, whether I had the 2 inches or not. And I noticed that when I took the test the second time, my dowel is over my heels now instead of me hyperextending. And I attribute that to the fact that I had dead bugs in my training program, which helped with activating my core while keeping my lumbar spine neutral. So I believe that this helped me stabilize my shoulders, because if you stabilize your lumbar spine, that also stabilizes your lats, which also stabilizes your arms. So I attribute that to the dead bug, which I will get into later. Also, I can't help but notice that when I was administering the test for myself, that unlike the first time when I took the FMS, in the second phase, I told myself to rip into the bar. This is because along the way I learned that when you do anything overhead with a light weight, your shoulders have a hard time stabilizing because it's just not enough weight on your body. So if you rip through the bar, it's the same as if you were lifting with 45 pounds. So I did have that in mind, although I tried to tell myself not to cue anything to make the results skewed. I couldn't help but notice that, and I couldn't help but tell myself that, and I didn't realize that until afterwards, that could be me cheating on the test. So I attribute this thoracic extension or correction of thoracic hyperextension to the dead bugs, and also me maybe cheating with different cues. And to give a frame of reference, this is what it looked like in the pre. So as you can see, I'm hyperextending my shoulders back through my thoracic spine, and in the post, I've corrected that issue. So next, in my original FMS, in my spine extension and spine flexion clearing test, I had 0, so I did not pass. However, in the second FMS, I passed. So I attribute that to the dead bug. So for progress, as you can see in day 1, so it's very slight here, but as you can see, as my right arm goes back and my left leg goes back, my right leg moves forward. I attribute that to the fact that I was not actually bracing my core when I was doing the movement. This is day 1, so I don't think I had a certain grasp of what it meant to brace your core. And because I'm not bracing my core, my legs were moving around and they weren't stabilized. So in day 6, which is halfway through my progress, before I started the exercise, I told myself to brace my core, essentially as if someone were to come up to me and punch me in the stomach. I braced my core and then I started the movement. Therefore, when I did it now, there's no movement in either of my legs. They stay completely still throughout the entire time. So now I understand I do have bracing in my core anytime I'm moving my limbs, and I believe that this helped with my overall pain in my back because I know how to stabilize my lumbar spine now and it's not moving around as much in my day-to-day life. So now I don't have pain. Next is the toe cars. So for the toe mobility, just to give a refresher, this is from the original FMS. So it's essentially lifting all your toes at once, bringing them down, all your toes once, bringing them down, and then lifting your big toe without your four toes, lifting your four toes without your big toe. So as you can see, the right foot has more mobility than the left, but overall the mobility is not greater. So again, as you can see, the right foot can slightly lift it, whereas the left foot, I'm struggling to only just lift my big toe without my other toes coming up with it. So some progress. This is day 7. As you can see, the right foot has a lot more mobility. The right toe can lift a little bit higher, and the left toe is slightly higher, but my four toes can lift up extremely high. So again, I'm slowly making progress to work on toe mobility. And this is from the FMS second portion that I took. As you can see, both my left and my right foot, I can lift all my toes extremely high, and I can also lift my big toe separately from my four toes extremely high for both feet. And another thing that I attribute to my FMS, or so my toe cars improving, is my foot intrinsic training. So as you can see, I was able to progress to being able to intrinsically move my foot. So this is day 1. Again, I don't think I understood the concept that well. However, over time, I was able to understand it. Because if you see here, I'm not doing it necessarily correct. I am putting an arch in my foot. However, I'm also flexing at my knee. So as you can see, my foot's kind of moving back. And so midway through, I put my hand behind there to stop that so that I'm only putting an arch in my foot. So again, this is day 1. And then, as you can see, this is day 12, which would be the last day. Now I don't even need my hand behind my foot. I can just put an arch in my foot without any issues. So I attribute those two things to my improvements in my toe mobility because my foot is more stable with the intrinsic training and my toe is then able to be more mobile through the toe cars. So again, my success from training, it is very minimal. I was not able to improve any of the scores for my FMS, but I was able to improve this overall movement for my toe cars, and I was also able to increase my foot stability and decrease the pain in my back. So what I would do differently, so to start off, although it was allowed for us to do 4 weeks, I feel like that just wasn't an adequate amount of time for me to see improvements or large improvements in my movement patterns because I noticed that in the later days of my second week, which is the last week of a phase, I noticed that I started to see some actual improvements. They were small, but I did actually start to see them myself. So I feel as though if I was able to add another week on, or maybe even 2 weeks, those small incremental changes would have been able to build on top of each other to be even larger. So to start off, I would probably make the phases longer if I was able to do the project for a longer amount of time. Second, I believe me being the client and the administrator for the FMS was not helpful to actually assess my overall abilities because I noticed that me understanding what gets you the best score for a test allowed me to subconsciously cheat a little bit on some scores and essentially do better. So again, if you notice when I did the deep squat, I was able to kind of cheat my way to getting my dowel over my feet. But you can also attribute that to an exercise that I have because I'm now bracing my core. So my lats are turned and they're activated, so I'm not hyperextending as much. So I can't decipher if that's because of my training or if because I told myself to rip into the bar. So again, me being the administrator and the client may have skewed these results. And then lastly, so the focus of the project was to be movement patterns to correct movements, so just using exercises. However, I feel as though majority of my back pain, which is why I got a 0 for my clearing test and my spine flexion and spine extension, was mainly due to the fact that I was sitting more and I was lying down more. So what I would do differently is to not necessarily have this as an exercise, but more of a note if I were to have like a client outside of myself, just to overall stop sitting and stop lying down as much, because this adds to the irregular movement patterns in a way that not because you're moving incorrectly, because you're not in a static position that's helpful for your body. Because when I sit and lie down a lot, I'm in a hypolordotic position. So that increases pain in my back. And also when I'm sitting on my hamstrings, and that tightens them and doesn't activate my glutes as much when I need to use them. So I would add in a portion where I would just note, hey, stop sitting or stop lying down as much. And what would I focus on if I continue training? So as I stated before, my success from training was mostly I increased my toe mobility, foot stability, and I decreased my back pain. So now I would transition into working on increasing core strength even more, ankle dorsiflexion, and overall decreasing the tightness in my hamstrings. So for the lumbar spine stabilization, I would then progress this into doing a chin up with one leg raised so that my core is being activated and I'm not over activating my back. For dorsiflexion, I would start with worm walks because from the joint by joint approach, now that my toe is mobile and my foot is stable, I can then move on to mobilizing my ankle in the sagittal plane. And then for my hamstrings, I would continue to work on activating my glutes with a banded clamshell, as well as a bent knee glute kickback, which is essentially you being on all fours, and with your knee in flexion, all you're going to do is extended your hips. So this allows you to do extension at the hips, only using your glutes because your hamstrings are focused on flexion at the knee. So this is the end of my project.